All right, so today we're going to be looking at how to draw the human head,
Okay.
specifically from a three-quarter view,
Yeah, right.
which is always a tricky one.
Yeah, it is.
And we're going to be taking a look at a YouTube tutorial by the artist Roberto Osti.
Okay, cool.
Um, and he has a really fascinating approach to this and really emphasizes the importance of understanding the proportions and planes of the head.
Oh, yeah, those are critical.
Absolutely.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, so like even these slight changes in angle can like really change how those features are going to be perceived.
Yeah, exactly. Three-quarter view. It's a good test of how well you understand the head. It's not just copying what you see.
Right.
It's about understanding, the structure and the forms and how they all connect in three-dimensional space.
Yeah, and how to translate that to the two-dimensional surface.
Absolutely.
So, how does Osti approach this? So he starts off by blocking in, which, sounds simple enough.
Right.
But then he says, to think of it like roughing in a sculpture.
Oh, that's cool.
And I was like, yeah, that's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's about thinking three-dimensionally from the get-go.
Right, yeah.
So he, loosely sketches the cranial volume, that's the skull,
Right.
and then the facial volume. And you're not worrying about details at this point. You're just getting that overall mass down.
Right, just getting like the big basic shapes.
Yeah, like shaping clay, just,
Yeah, yeah.
big chunks.
And he uses the center line as a guide, which seems obvious,
Right.
but I bet a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, it's critical, though, because it really helps you make sure that, as you go and add the features, that they all line up correctly, that you keep things symmetrical.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes this quite a bit, that, doing this simple step in the beginning sets you up for accuracy later on. It's like building a foundation so your drawing doesn't topple over.
Okay, so we've got the basic shapes in place.
Right.
How do we make sure everything's in proportion?
Ah, yes, proportion.
Because that's always
It's
a
tricky.
huge,
Yeah.
especially for beginners.
Yeah, it can get out of whack really fast.
Totally.
But Osti has a really good tip. He uses the back of the head as a reference point, and he mentions that it should align with the nose.
Oh, wow. I never
That interesting.
would have thought of that.
It's a subtle but important relationship.
Yeah. So,
And it really helps you, nail those proportions right from the start. And
Yeah.
he stresses, you got to constantly check those proportions and make adjustments as you go.
right. It's a process.
Yeah, it's not about getting it perfect the first time.
Right.
It's about observation and refinement.
So we've got the proportions down.
Okay.
Now I guess it's time to start working on those facial features.
Right. And Osti, adds them in a very specific order. Nose first, then the eyes, and the brow ridge, and then the mouth.
Okay.
And he mentions that the nose should be placed in relation to the iris.
Good.
And the eyes sit slightly above the halfway point of the head.
Gotcha.
So it's all very deliberate. It all builds upon the previous step.
Yeah. And even at this stage, he's thinking about how light and shadow are going to play on the planes of the head.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's always thinking ahead, visualizing the final form, even when he's just working with these simple shapes.
It's like he can see through the, beneath the surface.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's this point where he kind of switches from those soft, rounded forms to something more angular.
Yeah.
Like what's going on there?
So he calls this carving out the planes.
Okay.
So he's essentially transitioning from that rounded block in to more defined and angular planes that really give the head structure.
Okay.
He says, and this is a quote, "Associate the tonal characteristic of your drawing with the structural characteristic of your drawing."
Wow.
So essentially he's saying that light and shadow are directly tied to the shape of the head.
So it's not just outlining those shapes, it's showing how light defines them.
Exactly.
And to do that, we need to understand the structure.
You have to understand the underlying structure.
Yeah, so he starts to point out all these specific anatomical areas like the glabella,
Right.
which is that smooth part between the eyebrows.
Yeah.
The nation,
Mm-hmm.
where the nose meets the forehead.
Right.
The brow ridge.
Yep.
Zygomatic arch, which is your cheekbone.
The cheekbone.
So knowing all these landmarks is really important for showing how the planes of the head are interacting with the light.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding how those forms work together.
And he's constantly reminding us about the importance of observation,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it comes to the eyes.
Right.
And he even has this funny story about how, like, adrenaline can make the eyes wider and more intense.
He does.
So, we're not just like drawing a shape, we're trying to capture like the feeling of that moment.
Yeah, exactly. The face reflects our inner world. It shows what's happening on the inside.
So we've got the basic forms down.
Okay.
proportions are good,
Uh-huh.
started carving out those planes.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's time to like really start getting into those fine details. Like,
Well, not quite.
okay,
Oster's takes a very deliberate approach to this, and he explains how he tackles those smaller details, like the eyelids, the nose, and the mouth. And even in those areas like the lips, he's always paying attention to those subtle changes in plane
right.
and how they're going to affect the way light hits the form.
So he mentions the masseter muscle, which is the jaw muscle,
Yeah.
the temporalis, which is the side of the head,
Right.
the nasolabial furrow, the lines
Uh-huh.
from your nose to the corner of your mouth,
Yeah.
pillars of the mouth, the vertical lines around the lips. So it's
Yeah.
like every little nuance,
That all matters.
every little detail.
It seems like knowing these landmarks is really important, even when you're working on those smaller details.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps you understand how everything fits together
Right.
to create a believable structure.
But then how do you balance that with capturing individual characteristics?
That's the big question, bro.
Because, how do you balance those individual variations with that underlying structure?
Right, because everyone's face is different.
Exactly. We're not drawing, a head. We're drawing this person's head.
Right.
And that's where Osti's approach really shines. He
Yeah.
talks about finding that balance between the two.
Right.
For example, he mentions how body fat can affect the angularity of a profile.
Oh, interesting.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to
Right.
drawing faces.
So there's one feature that can be particularly challenging in the three-quarter view,
Uh-huh.
which is the ear.
Oh, the ear. Yeah.
How does he tackle that?
So he breaks it down really well. He explains how to position the ear based on its relationship to the brow ridge and the base of the nose.
Okay.
And he points out a detail that really surprised me.
What's that?
Depending on how the head is turned, the ear might actually stick out past the back of the head.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that weird?
I would not think.
You wouldn't think so.
Like the ear could protrude further than the skull itself.
Yeah.
So it really shows you have to observe carefully
Yeah.
to understand how all those parts relate.
Observation is key.
And if you are finding yourself fascinated by all this anatomy talk,
Yeah.
he actually has a whole book devoted to the head and neck.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Of course he does. He's an anatomy master.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of stuff does he cover in there?
So it goes way deeper. Like he has tons of information on muscles, all kinds of exercises to help you really develop an understanding of form and proportion.
So it's like a gold mine for anyone who wants to like really get into it.
It is. It's fantastic.
So, okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We talked about blocking and proportions, planes, details, anatomy, even the ear in three-quarter view.
The ear.
What are some key takeaways for the listener from this first part of our deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of understanding proportions, planes, and light.
Yes,
Those are the foundations
for sure.
of drawing a head from any angle, but especially the three-quarter view.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just copy what you see. You have to understand, how the underlying structure interacts with light and shadow
Right.
to create the form.
Yeah, it's like the why behind the what.
Exactly.
And that's what makes Osti's approach so valuable. He's not just teaching us the techniques, he's teaching us how to see like an artist.
Exactly, how to develop that artist's eye.
Yeah, and how would you encourage our listener to work on that?
Well, one of the best ways to do that is to practice. I encourage our listeners to try applying Osti's techniques to drawing from life or reference photos.
Yeah.
Pay attention to how the light shapes the forms, how it creates those subtle transitions. And the more you observe
Yeah.
and the more you practice, the more these insights will become second nature.
So it's all about practice and observation,
It is.
just like any skill.
Just like anything.
But it's also about learning to see the world
Yeah.
in a new way, to appreciate all these little subtle nuances that most people wouldn't even notice.
That's the beauty of art.
Yeah. And speaking of seeing the world in a new way, we're going to take a quick break and then come back and dive even deeper
Sounds good.
into Osti's process.
So, one thing that really struck me about Osti's approach is how he keeps emphasizing the connection between value and form.
Mm-hmm.
Like he even says, and I love this quote, the light and shadow pattern on a form should look like the form itself.
Yeah.
It's a simple idea, but it's so profound.
Right. He's really drilling down on the idea that light and shadow aren't just random shading.
Yeah.
It's like it's directly tied to the shape of the head.
Yeah.
The light is revealing the form to us.
Exactly. And if you want to create a realistic portrait, you have to understand that relationship. It's not just about copying outlines. It's about understanding how light sculpts the forms and creates those subtle gradations
Right.
from light to shadow.
Yeah, it's almost like thinking like a sculptor,
Yeah.
even though we're working in 2 dimensions.
Absolutely. And that's why Osti's method of starting with those basic volumes is so effective.
Right.
It forces you to think about the head three-dimensionally
Right, from the start.
from the get-go.
So we've talked a lot about the technical stuff.
Okay.
What about like the more expressive side of things? Like
Yeah.
how do we capture those subtle nuances that convey emotion and personality?
Right.
That seems like a whole other level.
Well, it is, and observation is key, you know?
Right.
Remember that story Osti told about adrenaline and how it affects the eyes?
Huh.
It's a great reminder that the face reflects our inner world.
Yeah.
Like even the tiniest shift in a muscle can completely change an expression.
So we're not just drawing features, we're capturing a glimpse of what's going on inside that person's head.
Exactly, and that's what makes portraiture so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's this blend of technical skill and emotional sensitivity.
Right.
You need to understand those underlying structures,
Right.
but you also have to be attuned to those subtle cues
Yeah.
that reveal personality and emotion.
It's where science meets art.
I love that.
And speaking of science, there's one anatomical detail that Osti mentions.
Uh-huh.
I found this really interesting. The temporalis muscle.
Oh, yeah?
It runs along the side of the head,
Right.
and he points out it can be pretty noticeable in some people,
Yeah.
especially those who clench their jaw a lot.
Yeah, especially if you're stressed,
Oh, yeah.
that temporalis will really show.
It's a small detail, but it can really impact the overall shape of the head
Absolutely.
and the way light plays across it.
And how that light plays across it, yeah.
It's another one of those hidden clues
Yeah.
that helps us capture a person's unique features.
Exactly, and it just goes to show every detail matters,
Right.
even the ones that seem insignificant.
At first glance,
At first.
you mentioned earlier that Osti has a book
Yes,
that delves even deeper into head and neck anatomy.
I did.
What kind of stuff can we expect to find in there?
Oh, it's fantastic. He covers everything from the bones to the muscles,
Wow.
how they all work together. He has exercises to help you develop your understanding of form and proportion.
Sounds like a must-read
It is.
for any aspiring portrait artist.
If you want to really get into it,
I'm adding it to my list,
you won't regret it.
for sure.
Osti has such a way of presenting complex information
Yeah,
in a really clear and engaging way.
right. And not dry and boring,
Not at all.
which a lot of anatomy books can be.
They can be a little dry.
Right. It's like you said, he has a real passion
Yeah,
for anatomy, and it's contagious.
it is.
It's funny. We often talk about art as this purely visual thing,
Right.
but listening to Osti describe his process,
Uh,
it's clear there's a lot of mental work going on, too.
oh, yeah.
He's constantly analyzing, making decisions.
Absolutely. He's always thinking several steps ahead,
Right.
considering how each decision is going to affect the final outcome.
Like a mental chess game.
It is. It's like a chess game.
And you don't always see that when you look at the finished drawing. You
Right.
see the skill, you see the technique,
Right.
but you don't necessarily see all the thought
All the thought that went into it. Yeah.
that went into it.
It's like the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's this whole foundation of knowledge and understanding that supports the final image.
And I think that's what makes Osti such a great teacher.
Yeah.
He's not just showing you how to draw, he's helping you understand why you're doing it that way.
Exactly. He breaks those complex ideas down and makes them accessible.
Right.
And he doesn't shy away from the anatomical details.
Right.
Which are so crucial for understanding how the human face works.
It's like he's handing you the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
And saying, go explore.
Go explore.
Discover your own voice.
Exactly.
So for our listener out there who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all this, what words of encouragement would you offer?
Well, I would say don't be afraid to start small.
Yeah.
Break the process down into manageable steps.
Right.
Maybe focus on one feature at a time.
Yeah.
And remember, it's about progress, not perfection.
Right.
Every drawing is a step forward
That's such great advice.
on your artistic journey.
Because it's easy to compare ourselves to others and get discouraged.
Yeah.
But the most important thing is to enjoy the process
Yeah.
and celebrate those small wins.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of community.
Yes.
Find other artists, share your work, get feedback, support each other.
Yeah.
Art can be a solitary pursuit,
Yeah.
but it's so much more fulfilling
Right.
when you share it with others.
It really is. And that brings us back to the heart of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We started with a YouTube tutorial,
Right.
But we've gone way beyond the technical aspects of drawing.
We have.
We've explored anatomy, the creative process,
Yeah.
even the social side of art.
It's been a really holistic exploration.
And that's what I love about these deep dives.
Yeah.
We take a seemingly simple topic
Right.
and we unpack it,
And we unpack it.
revealing all these layers of complexity and meaning.
It's like peeling an onion, you know?
Right.
Every layer reveals something new.
And just when you think you've reached the core,
Yeah.
there's another layer
Another layer.
waiting to be discovered.
It never ends.
It never ends.
And that's what makes art so fascinating.
And rewarding.
Yes.
All right, well, I think it's time to take another quick break,
Okay.
and then we'll come back for our final thoughts.
Oh.
Okay, so we're back, and I am still thinking about that onion analogy.
That's a good one.
It really is like there's always something new to discover.
Always another layer.
Yeah, and just when you think you've got it all figured out, you realize there's a whole other onion underneath.
Right. Exactly.
So we've talked a lot about Osti and his methods,
Yeah.
but I want to hear from you.
Okay.
What are some of the artists or techniques that have influenced like your approach to drawing?
That's a great question. I've been lucky enough to learn from a lot of talented artists over the years, you know?
Right.
And they each have their own unique style. One artist I really admire is John Singer Sargent.
Oh, yeah?
His ability to capture like a likeness, but also a personality.
Yeah.
With these seemingly effortless brushstrokes.
It's incredible.
It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then there's Andrew Loomis,
Oh, yeah, Loomis.
whose books on figure drawing and anatomy
Classic.
have been so helpful for me.
Yeah, his books are like the Bible
They are.
for figure drawing.
They're fantastic. And then a more contemporary artist, Steve Houston,
Okay.
who has this really dynamic approach to figure drawing.
Yeah.
And it's really pushed me to like think outside the box
Right.
and experiment with new ways of seeing.
It's amazing how much you can learn from studying different artists.
Oh, it's so valuable.
It's like you're adding all these different tools
Yeah.
to your artistic toolbox.
Exactly. The more tools you have, the more expressive you can be.
So for our listener who's just starting out on their artistic journey,
Yeah.
what advice would you give them?
Well, I think the most important thing is to cultivate a love of learning.
Yeah.
Be curious, ask questions,
Right.
and always be open to trying new techniques. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Oh, that's huge.
Mistakes are how we learn.
Yeah.
That's how we grow.
Mistakes are our friends.
They are. Embrace those mistakes.
Yeah.
See them as opportunities to learn something new. And remember, art is a journey, not a destination.
So well said.
Enjoy the process.
Yeah.
Celebrate your progress.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
it.
And never lose sight of the joy that creating brings.
That's beautifully said. It's all about finding your own path,
Yeah.
expressing yourself authentically.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe one day your work will inspire others to embark on their own artistic journeys.
That's a lovely thought. And speaking of inspiration, we'd love to hear from you, our listener.
Yes.
What artists or techniques have inspired you
Yeah. What are you excited about?
on your journey?
Yeah.
We want to know.
Let us know.
All right, so I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
But before we go, I want to leave our listener with one final thought. We've talked a lot about observing and understanding the human form,
Yeah.
but don't forget to observe and understand your own creative process.
Oh, that's good.
You know, pay attention to what inspires you,
Yeah.
what challenges you, what brings you joy,
Yeah. What brings you joy?
and use those insights
Yeah, absolutely.
to fuel your own artistic journey.
Be curious about your own process. Be playful. Be fearless.
Love it.
And never stop creating.
Perfectly said. Until next time, keep those pencils sharp and those creative sparks flying.